Hello, everyone. Now that we've covered 11.1 through 11.6, I wanted to briefly look at 11.7. I know we started this kind of last week. We assigned it to you last week just so you could review all the previous sections a little bit that you had covered before the test. I think you had only covered like 11.1 through 11.4, so we wanted you to review those sections. But now that we've done 11.5 and 11.6 as well, maybe now's a good time to revisit 11.7 and kind of get a broad view of series. So let's say we have this thing, a series from 1 to infinity of a sub n. Okay, just a general series. Remember, this is where what's the idea behind this series? We're adding up an infinite list of numbers. Okay, and then some questions naturally arise. Does the series converge or diverge? And if it converges, what is the sum? And as we saw in section 11.6, we can actually get a bit more specific when we talk about convergence. We can talk about absolute convergence, conditional convergence. Okay, so we have those two different types of convergence. Okay, so don't, maybe you're confused. Okay, well, what's the difference? Before we were in like the first 5 sections of chapter 11, we were just asking these questions. Does the series converge or diverge? And now all of a sudden we're asking about, okay, does it, what's absolute convergence and conditional convergence? Okay, so don't get too hung up on that. Okay, think of these as, we could kind of think of the general questions as these two, and then this absolute convergence versus conditional convergence, that's kind of, we're looking at convergence, and we're just getting a bit more specific. Okay, we're kind of giving a bit more detail. So these two ideas are just more detail about convergence. Okay. So let's talk quickly about some strategies for testing series for convergence or divergence, right? So kind of going back to these questions, right? This is the main question we're concerned with for series, whether they converge or diverge. In certain special cases, we can find the sum, right? But usually we can't find the sum, so usually we're just concerned with that first question. Does the series converge or diverge? Okay. And then, as I said, sometimes we get specific about that convergence. Okay. So really what we're concerned with is convergence or divergence. And so what are the strategies we have when we just need to test some general series for convergence? Okay. The first thing I would do if I was given a problem, if I was given a series AN and the question was, does the series converge or diverge? Okay, what would I do? What would somebody who's had a bit of experience do? Okay, when trying to answer that question, the first thing you do is you just look at the series and see if anything pops out to you. There's a few things that should be really obvious when you see them. Okay, a few types of series. Okay, so first and foremost maybe would be the P series. Okay, if I have a series of the form 1 over n to the power p, that's going to pop out at you right away, right? It's fairly obvious when you see that. And then obviously if we have a P series, we're going to use that P test, or that theorem regarding convergence of P series, if you want to call it that. I just refer to it as P test. The series is going to converge if P is greater than 1 and diverge if P is less than or equal to 1. Okay. What other types of series should pop out at you right away? Geometric series, those are pretty obvious, right? A times r to the n, okay? And also, I would say alternating series, those are pretty obvious when they pop out at you, right? At least, there's a little bit of checking to do with alternating series, maybe more so than in these two series. But if you see a -1 to the power n, like we have here, that tells us we're going to have some sort of alternating sign, right? Now, there's some conditions that go with alternating series test, and I'm not going to go all over all of them again here. So, we have to be careful with this because there's some conditions to check. But that -1 to the power n, that's a very good indicator that maybe you should be using alternating series test. It's not going to always be the case, but we're talking about general strategies here, right? So if I saw -1 to the power n, I would try my hand at alternating series right off the bat. So these three are pretty obvious, and after checking these obvious things, we're just going to start methodically working our way through the others. So if we have a series and these first three things don't work, we're just going to start working through the next, all other tests kind of systematically. So maybe if we're trying to show a series is convergent, maybe it's not convergent, maybe it's divergent. And the divergence test is really easy, right? It's just looking at these terms an. If those an's don't go to 0, the series diverges by the divergence test. This divergence test, that should be something you try pretty early. Maybe if you look at a series and nothing's popping out at you right away, we don't have any of these three things popping out at us, maybe the first thing to do is just do a divergence test and see if the series diverges. Okay. Maybe we do the divergence test and the series, let's see, maybe the limit of the terms does go to 0. Okay, so in that case, divergence test doesn't really tell us anything, right? We got to do some other stuff. So what else? What other strategies do we have? Well, if a sub n is a function, if there's some continuous function that spits out these a sub n's, right? Maybe that's a good indication we should be doing integral test. Right? If the series is similar to one of these, in particular these two cases, the P series or the geometric series, maybe that's a good indication we should be doing comparison test. So for example, if I had 1 over n to the 4 plus 5, if I just had 1 over n to the 4, that's a P series, right? So this thing's really similar to a P series, so maybe I should be thinking comparison test and try and compare it to that P series. Okay. Finally, ratio test and root test. We learned these in section 11.6, and we use those to test for absolute convergence, right? But remember that absolute convergence implies convergence, okay? So even if the question's not asking about absolute convergence, maybe I'm given a series AN and I'm just asked whether it converges or diverges, and nobody mentions absolute convergence or conditional convergence. I can still use ratio test and root test on this. And if the limit in these tests is less than 1, then the series converges absolutely. But that means the series converges, right? So I can use these as convergence tests as well, just a test for regular old convergence. And a good guideline of maybe you're asking, when do I use ratio test versus root test? We talked about factorials a little bit in the previous video. If you see a factorial, that's usually going to be ratio test. If you see everything to a power n, that's usually going to be root test. Okay, I say usually because, again, these aren't rules, but they're good guidelines to follow. Okay, so that's a quick overview of a quick strategy for the series. What's coming up next? Okay, so in section, we've kind of covered series. We've kind of covered series of this form. Okay. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start taking this knowledge and doing fancier stuff with it. So notice that this series, right? If these are just a bunch of numbers, there's no x's involved here, right? So there's no independent variable. Okay, so these are just numbers. They're real numbers. There's nothing unknown about these terms, right? And then there's some questions to answer, like maybe this series converges, maybe it doesn't. Okay, but there's no independent variable. This is not a function of x. So the next step is to introduce some x's. Okay, and maybe we'll have a series like this. We would call this a power series. And now there's this unknown quantity in our series, this independent variable. And so we kind of take a series and make it into a function. And that's kind of where we're going next. But I'll start going over that more in the next video. All right, so again, short video this time, just a general overview of the strategies. All this material's in the book, and you know, you can browse it at your leisure. It's pretty much the exact same as what I've just presented here.